Thank you for joining Marianne and the Professor. And I'm delighted to be speaking with Inge at Seasons in Bath. Inge has a lovely natural food health store, and she's very knowledgeable, and she's from Sweden. So of course I had to ask her all my questions to do with Sweden, because I spent time there a year and a half ago. I spent a couple months enjoying a lockdown free society. It was quite phenomenal. So Inge, thank you for taking the time to chat with me.
My pleasure.
So tell me, you're living in England, but
Yep.
you are from Sweden. Tell me the differences between the Swedish model and the, well, let's talk about first what happened in Sweden from your perspective. The Anders Tegnell, the epidemiologist.
They went against the grain, and no one was more surprised, I think, than the rest of the world, because Swedes are generally kind of pretty, homogeneous as a population, and in their behavior, and the whole cultural background and political background, which is, in my opinion, that Swedish people tend to rely an awful lot on authorities, on the state, and they do as they're told. They're very obedient. I grew up in the 1970s, and I remember the health recommendation at the time, and so will anyone over 50 know this, is we were recommended that it was very good for our health to eat 6 to 8 slices of bread every day.
That is so interesting.
And that is such an awful recommendation.
Awful.
Absolutely. Funnily enough, we also have a lot of gluten intolerance in Sweden. I don't know if that's related, but it's interesting. I think I arrived at age 18 in England, and I think that somehow I wasn't Swedish enough to stay in Sweden, because this is my home. It truly is. But I do have the perspective. I did return to Sweden for a 9-year period when my children were born. I did, however, return to England because I couldn't stay away. This is where I want to live. Sweden, during lockdown, well,
Turn
I
right.
think...
Keep going. Sorry.
It's all right. I think everyone was really surprised that they did the exact opposite from the rest of the world, which was stay open. I think that was absolutely wonderful, because living in the UK, the disaster that was lockdown and its repercussions, we haven't even seen the beginning of that yet, I think. In terms of, the catastrophe that is our economy, or the incredible mental health issues to our young people, children, young people who are struggling so much from this. I have 2 teenagers, and I know that it was not easy to sit in lockdown with a computer screen and somehow try to continue their education. In fact, they lost a huge chunk of their education. I think we probably need to think twice, should there ever be a similar situation on a global scale. I can't imagine that the world will react the same if it happens again.
I don't think people have an appetite for lockdowns again.
No.
I think they understand that that's not a protocol or a reaction or response that's appropriate. It's a prison term.
Oh, absolutely.
To quarantine healthy people. Unprecedented.
So
tell
damaging.
me, I think I was intrigued to see that despite Sweden maintaining normalcy and building herd immunity, no masks, no lockdowns, when we were there, life was as per normal. It was Christmas, and all the shops were open and the restaurants, not a mask to be found. And I know that back in Canada, it was bubbles of 3 gathering for Christmas and all sorts of nonsense.
Same here.
But I was intrigued to see that when the vaccine came, they rolled out the vaccine. And I thought, wait a minute, Anders Tegnell had said that you are going to have herd immunity, and all of a sudden they're rolling out a vaccine. Why? Why did the Swedes accept that or take it?
Swedish society have always used, the vaccines that we all know that are administered to our children when they're young. And I think when the word vaccine was used, without being too questioning, I think the vast majority of people just thought, great, we're not gonna die.
So they were fearful, despite not having been locked down. They were still fearful enough to line up.
Well, I think
and
we've
get that.
seen how easy it is to frighten a population.
Yes.
Really.
So what was the messaging in Sweden? What did they say to the people?
Well, I don't think they needed probably, I don't know, but I suspect they didn't need to really say anything. What we did have, even though I know the numbers were much lower than elsewhere, was of course, predictably, it was the elderly who were the hardest hit.
Yeah.
And so if you already have poor health and age to contend with, you will be more susceptible to perhaps more serious viral infection. And I think when people started seeing that, and of course no country is an island, because the media and the stories coming in from the rest of the world, I don't think it was very difficult to persuade Swedish people to
So they
to
lined
go
up.
and get the jab.
And what percentage of the people do you think in Sweden got
I
the
don't know,
jab?
high numbers. I think
Yeah,
very high
I've
numbers.
heard anywhere upwards of 90%,
Yeah,
which
I
shocked
think-
me
yeah.
because I thought they weren't fearful when I was there. Life was normal. And so I was, and they didn't force it.
Yeah.
They didn't
Well-
ask people in Sweden to get it, or they lose their job, or they couldn't travel. There was none of that.
Trying to remember if it was swine flu or bird flu. Was it swine flu in 2008?
I think so.
And my children we were living in Sweden at the time. My children were young and going to nursery. When the vaccine was offered at that time, again, new vaccine, the reactions and the reception in various different European countries was, so in the UK the uptake for the vaccines was incredibly low. I don't remember all the, but I do know that there was an enormous difference from country to country within Europe. In Sweden, people were literally queuing up outside their health centers for this vaccine. I happened to just very casually mention this when I was collecting my 4-year-old daughter. And I was really attacked by another parent at that time who said that it was my civil duty to get the vaccine, and how could I be so selfish and so irresponsible not to have myself and my children jabbed for the swine flu.
Wow.
2008.
So the psychology of the Swedes is almost a collective, it's socialism.
Yeah.
It really is socialism.
Yeah, it is
And you
socialism.
mentioned to me that they've adopted digital currencies. You said they don't use cash.
No, they don't use cash.
And you
anymore.
you suspect that they're going to adopt the chip in the hand for convenience as well. They might be.
Don't know whether that's
Yeah.
going to be widespread, but I know people generally think it's a positive thing.
Isn't that remarkable?
Yeah.
So they're very compliant.
Very
The
compliant,
Swedes.
yeah.
Remarkable.
And I think that's the main difference between the UK and Sweden.
Yes.
Is I think you have a large, healthy number of the population here who, I think, just question authority and on a very general basis.
And
that
our
much more.
thinking, I find that the British way is to think. They're
I can't
I
say.
think- yeah.
I think just
More than in
there is
Canada.
there is no trust in authority, and I don't think people really trust government, sadly, anymore.
but
for
actually
obvious reasons.
right now that's a good thing.
Yes.
You know, that is a very
Yeah.
handy position to hold,
Yeah.
to not trust. And this might be the problem in Canada, is people are very trusting of government. So I asked you earlier what your experience is in terms of British people coming in your shop, experiencing injury. Have you seen an uptick in that? What?
Well, what you have is people coming through the door, and they will either say that they've had COVID, and that they're experiencing symptoms of long COVID, it's not quite as common for people to come and say, I had the jab and I think I'm, have health problems from that. Because I don't think people necessarily put two and two together. It's when people start describing their symptoms that, and obviously it's speculation.
Yes.
I will be clear about that.
But what's the typical profile? What are the complaints that you're hearing
Well,
most commonly?
the most common one that we hear obviously is taste buds and sense of smell. That goes.
Okay, so your taste is gone, your sense of smell. What about hearing?
No, haven't heard that.
Not that. So it's
but
taste and
after
smell.
that, it's a long list of weird and wonderful symptoms of fatigue, which obviously we all know about post-viral fatigue. So, and I think in our society, we also don't allow enough rest to recover from viral infections in general, regardless. I think an enormous number of people perhaps would have been in a better position if they'd have healthy D levels, zinc levels, obviously really basic stuff.
Basic, but the government never talked about vitamin D, did they?
No,
and yet
it would have been a very cheap intervention.
Absolutely. So thank goodness this shop is here and you're here to help educate people and help people now with the injuries, because my sense is we're seeing many more injuries.
Yeah, absolutely.
The awareness of the injuries is raising, and people need help. Give me your hit list of the things that people should be using quickly.
NAC, N-acetylcysteine, quercetin, nattokinase, bromelain. Those would be vitamin D, zinc.
Yeah. So those are the major ones.
And
if they can get their hands on ivermectin, if you're vaccine injured, I guess that wouldn't hurt. Little tricky to get.
Yeah, and obviously not something that I would be selling in a health food shop.
No, you can't source it. I don't think anyone can source it in this country. If you're like Canada, it's like contraband. Yeah. But thank you so much, Inga. This is very, very interesting, and you have the perspective of Sweden and England, which is interesting. Yeah. So thank you. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.